I did not kill my daughter, I did not write the ransom note, and I don't know who did either of those things. Someone was in our home the night of December 25th and murdered our daughter while we slept.
The district attorney and his top prosecutor, 2 police chiefs, and a large number of cops, although so at odds on some points that they almost came to blows, all agreed on one thing, that probable cause existed to arrest Patsy Ramsey in connection with the death of her daughter.
There was someone who was not a member of our family in our home that night, took JonBenét from her bed and murdered her. I found a ransom note. I found my daughter missing from her bedroom, and several hours later, our daughter was found dead in our home. It's my belief that whoever wrote the ransom note probably had something to do with her murder.
We know for a fact that there was a deliberate and thought out effort on the behalf of the police at the direction of the FBI to publicly assassinate our character and discredit us and bring massive pressure on Patsy and I in hopes that one of us would confess or break and turn the other one in. I remember the kids bounding into our room that morning, excited to open their presents. Our normal tradition is that I go downstairs, turn on the Christmas tree lights. I brought a bicycle out of the garage that I had us a surprise for Patsy. The kids came down, we opened presents. JonBenét wanted me to take movies, but my battery was dead. We had breakfast. Christmas breakfast. At some point I went out to the airport to pre-pack some gifts in the airplane, check it out, get it ready for an early morning departure. I remember kids being in and out of the house when I was there, neighborhood kids. I remember JonBenét asking me to help her ride her bike around the corner, around the block, her new bike that she'd gotten for Christmas. We were going to go to the Whites that evening for a dinner. We went to the Whites' house where they had family and relatives, friends, I guess. We were perhaps the only friends there for a Christmas dinner.
I did not kill my daughter, JonBenét.
We left. Patsy wanted to drop 2 gifts off at the Walkers and the Steins, which we did on the way home. We pulled in the driveway into the garage. JonBenét was asleep in the back of the car. I carried her upstairs and put her to bed.
Was that the last time you saw JonBenét alive?
Yes, it was. Well, I got up, was showering, getting prepared for a trip that we were leaving on early that morning. I heard Patsy scream. I ran downstairs. She told me that JonBenét was missing, that there was a ransom note. She asked me, what should we do? I said, call the police. Sometime during that frantic period, we checked on Burke. He appeared to be asleep to us. And I focused all the energy I could focus on getting my daughter back. A uniformed officer arrived reasonably quickly. I think it was French, was the first one there, Officer French. He spoke to me. I told him my daughter had been kidnapped. He said, do you think she might have just run away? And I said, for heaven's sake, she's only 6 years old. No, I don't. He asked us all to, Patsy and I, to stay in the sunroom, which is a small room off our living room. Other people arrived. The police arrived. They asked to use our cell phones because theirs were dead. They asked us to do a number of things that required us to leave that room. I remember telling, I believe it was Linda Arndt, that I thought all the doors were locked. And I didn't understand how someone could have gotten in. Of course, I learned later that one of the doors was found wide open. Oh, they asked, was anyone angry with you at work? Was anyone around you acting peculiar recently in the last few days? Anyone you could think of that would do such a thing? I know that in terms of people that were angry with me at work, I mentioned Jeff Merrick, who we had terminated due to performance, and he was extremely angry to the point of making threats in the past 6 months prior to that. Patsy made me aware of Linda Hoffman Pugh's strange behavior just prior to, but you need to ask Patsy about that. I have a vague recollection of telling Linda Arndt that I found an open window with broken glass, but that I perhaps had broken that glass myself months earlier. She told me to go through the house and look for anything, go through the house thoroughly, as I recall, and look for anything that seems out of place. And so my intent was to do it thoroughly. I went back into the train room, showed Fleet the broken window, explained to him that I might have broken it myself months ago. Showed him the suitcase that I saw under the window, which I felt was very out of place. We looked for any large pieces of broken glass, and then I got up and went to the cellar room, opened the door, and found JonBenét. I saw a white blanket, and I knew immediately I'd found JonBenét.
When you found the white blanket, what did you do?
I took the tape off of her mouth. I tried to untie the cord that was wrapped around her arms, and I kissed her and talked to her.
Did you do anything then, after that?
I realized that she wasn't just asleep, that this was not good.
I found a ransom note. I found my daughter missing from her bedroom, and several hours later, our daughter was found dead in our home.
And you don't feel it was a member of your own family? Is that correct?
No, sir.
That's
It was
fine.
not a member of my family.
Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to show you a document. I'd like you to look at it and take your time. I'm going to ask you if you recognize the photograph? Can you identify any of the individuals in the photograph?
Just Jean Monnet.
Okay. I would like you to now look at the handwriting below the photograph. Do you recognize the handwriting?
Not particularly.
All right. Do you, so you say not particularly, you don't recognize this as being your handwriting, is that correct?
I don't remember writing it. Is that what you mean? I mean,
But-
I don't know. I may have.
All right, but do you recognize the handwriting as being your handwriting?
No.
Okay. Now we're going to go to another exhibit. Do you recognize any of the handwriting as being your handwriting?
Not particularly.
So you couldn't say with any degree of certainty that that was your handwriting?
No.
Mrs. Ramsey, what I'm showing you is a series of letters, and I'm not identifying their source, I'm just simply showing you a series of letters. I'd like you to look at them carefully. Can you, without knowing the source or where these letters are from, identify any of them?
No, sir.
I'd like you to look at the letter B and tell me if those B's look at all similar to you.
Well, they're both lowercase b's.
Is there anything about the B's that to you look similar, beside the fact that they're lowercase? The way they're drawn?
No, not particularly.
Okay, I'm going to ask you then to look to the letter above the letter that we've identified as B and what looks like it could be a G. And I'm going to ask you to look at the G. And I'm going to ask you whether or not you see any similarities between the G's and what those similarities are.
Well, they're both lowercase g. They're both more the same size than the b's are.
What about the way in which what looks like what could be described as a tail with the G? Is there any similarity with respect to that?
It swings to the left.
Right. Do they look similar, the tails, to the G?
Somewhat. I mean, it's a
Just a-
G. You make a G with the tail to the left.
Okay.
Is that what you mean? One's squiggly and one is smoother.
As a
I would say they're
layperson
most
could say.
similar in
Or dissimilar.
size. The one
So
on the
you-
right is more shaky, it looks like.
And what about the one on the left?
It's not as shaky. And the one on the right has a little swoop up on the tail, and the one on the left does not.
Right.
The one on the left has a thicker circle of the part of the G, and the one on the right.
The next objects or letters look like they might be O's, the letter O. Please point out any similarities or dissimilarities that you see.
I don't think they look a thing alike. One
Similarities.
is large, one is small, one is really heavy and feathered, kind of, and one is smoother.
All right. Any other similarities or dissimilarities before I move on that you'd like to
They both
make up?
have an opening in the middle.
Were you aware that there was a part in the ransom note where you were told not to contact authorities?
I think I read that later.
Did you think that there might be a chance that if you called a group of people over to the house and it was being observed that the kidnappers might in fact see that you disobeyed the condition of their ransom note?
Well, that just didn't go through my mind at that time.
Whose idea was it to call all of the people that eventually arrived, your friends or whatever, that came afterwards?
Oh, I did that.
Okay. Can you tell me why you did that?
It just seemed instinctive. It was just kind of a very stressful time, and I just called on friends.
Had you read the ransom note by that time?
I don't think I had read all of it, no.
Mr. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to look at the document that's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 16 for identification, and I'm going to ask you if you recognize this document.
Yes, I believe I do.
Could you identify it, please?
Well, it appears to be a copy of the ransom note that we found in our home.
Does it look substantially like the ransom note that you saw that morning?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Now, Mr. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to once again look at it, and I'm going to ask you if, in looking at it, whether or not you see any similarity between your wife's handwriting and the handwriting in the ransom note, you personally.
Absolutely not.
None at all?
No,
Not even a little bit?
not even a little bit.
All right. Now, Mr. Ramsey,
Patsy writes very neatly. She's a feminine writer.
right.
There's misspellings in the note. She graduated at the top of her class. She doesn't misspell words like business and possession.
Do you think the ransom note writer was trying to disguise their identity?
I've been told that that was the intent, but there are parts of it that where that's broken down. I don't know which parts, but
Do you think that maybe some of the misspelling may have been an attempt by whoever was writing this note to disguise their identity?
I don't think so, because I think they tried to be very articulate to the best of their ability, and the misspellings were because they didn't know how to spell those words.
With respect to the sloppiness of the handwriting, do you think it's possible that the handwriting, the person who wrote this handwriting was trying to make their handwriting look sloppier than normal?
I don't know. It's very sloppy handwriting. I would agree with that.
Mr. Ramsey, were you ever told that Mrs. Ramsey could not be eliminated from any of the handwriting investigation being done by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation? Did anybody ever tell you that?
I was told that it was virtually certain that she did not write the note, but that there were some similarities which exist in all of our handwriting because we've all been taught the same, and that's how we communicate is with the written language in English. But that because of these few similarities, she could not be absolutely eliminated, but it was highly improbable that she wrote the note. And that in fact, there were more dissimilarities in her writing than a number of other people that have been looked at.
Right. Do you know if your handwriting was examined by the law enforcement?
As far as I know, it was.
Do you know whether or not you were eliminated as the author of the note?
I was told that on a scale of 1 to 5, Patsy was placed at a 4.5 in terms of probability. In other words, a very low probability. Mine was a 5.
I'm going to ask you if you recognize, without naming anybody, any of the figures in that particular document.
I think I recognize 2.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you to look at the handwriting beneath the document, and I'm going to ask you if you recognize that handwriting.
I do not.
Could it be your wife's handwriting?
I don't recognize it. It doesn't look like Patsy's writing. It's sloppy. It's irregular. I would not look at that and say that's Patsy's handwriting.
Thank you. Now I'm going to hand you Plaintiff's Exhibit number 2 that was marked for identification yesterday, and I'm going to ask you to please look at that. Now, I'm going to ask you if you can identify, without naming the individuals in those photographs, any of them.
Yes.
Now I'm going to ask you to look at the handwriting and tell me if you can recognize the handwriting.
I do not.
Could that be your wife's handwriting?
I doubt it very seriously.
Can you tell me why you don't think it's your wife's handwriting?
It doesn't look like her handwriting. It's sloppy. It just doesn't look like her handwriting. No, I do not base my opinion on the reports that I have heard from others. I base my opinion on that I know my wife. I would stake my life on the fact that she did not murder her child. She did not fake all of this nonsense, and she did not write this bizarre note. That's what I stake my belief on, Mr.
So
Hoffman.
it's not based on anything empirical, such as
The
reports?
empirical information supports that belief, totally.
I'm just wanting to determine whether you're familiar with the empirical information that supports it.
Yes.
I'm trying to distinguish between your belief in your wife, which is understandable, and a belief that comes from actually having looked at forensic evidence that you personally have had an opportunity to view. In light of the fact that you have admitted that you have not physically seen the handwriting reports themselves, but maybe relying on summaries from the people around you, why are you so certain that Mrs. Ramsey is not the ransom note writer?
Because I know my wife. I know how much she loved JonBenét. I know how much she valued life. She valued every day that she lived, and lived every day to its fullest as if it were a gift from God.
Are you aware that there are handwriting experts that are working on behalf of Chris Wolf who have concluded that Patsy Ramsey is, as one of them said, without doubt, the ransom note writer?
They're wrong. And they've made probably a serious career-limiting decision if that, in fact, is their statement.
Probably
Because
like
that's
Donald.
something that neither the CBI, the FBI, the Secret Service, nor the top experts in this country have ever said. In fact, quite the contrary.
How do you know that, Mr. Ramsey? That they
I've
never
heard
said it?
statements from the police. I've heard statements from the district attorney. I've heard the results of what we consider, and most people would consider, the top handwriting experts and linguistic experts in the country, all of which have said highly improbable that Patsy wrote the note.
Yet you've never actually seen any of these reports.
I have never read any of the reports. They've never physically been given to me. I
So
think
that's all-
Patsy was very clear that she did identify handwriting that she recognized as hers.
And quite frankly, she may very well have been telling the truth.
What
Well,
might be
quite
interesting,
frankly, she was telling the truth, Mr.
All right.
Hoffman.
We are not afraid to face even our most vile opponent, of which I consider the National Enquirer to be one of the most vile. And, you know, we have faced Steve Thomas, we have faced the National Enquirer, we have nothing to hide, and I'm facing you today, Mr. Hoffman.
As we've been reporting this week, for the first time, Patsy Ramsey answered questions under oath about the murder of her daughter, JonBenét. John and Patsy Ramsey are being sued by a man they say, quote, represented too many unanswered questions in JonBenét's death. It's been nearly 5 years since the little girl was murdered, and no arrests have been made. Lynn Wood is the lawyer for the Ramsey family. Mr. Wood, good morning.
good morning, Katie.
Why was this the first time that Patsy Ramsey answered questions under oath? That seems awfully strange to people since this investigation has been going on for almost 5 years.
There was never a request that she testify under oath or be interviewed under oath. That would not be routine police procedure.
I believe she committed the murder, I told Smith, and proceeded to lay out what I thought had happened. In my hypothesis, an approaching 40th birthday, the busy holiday season, an exhausting Christmas day, and an argument with JonBenét had left Patsy frazzled. Her beautiful daughter, whom she frequently dressed almost as a twin, had rebelled against wearing the same outfit as her mother. When they came home, John Ramsey helped Burke put together a Christmas toy. JonBenét, who had not eaten much at the White's party, was hungry. Her mother let her have some pineapple, and then the kids were put to bed. John Ramsey read to his little girl. Then he went to bed. Patsy stayed up to prepare for the trip to Michigan the next morning, a trip she admittedly did not particularly want to make. Later, JonBenét awakened after wetting her bed, as indicated by the plastic sheets, the urine stains, the pull-up diaper package hanging halfway out of a cabinet, and the balled-up turtleneck found in the bathroom. I concluded that the little girl had worn the red turtleneck to bed, as her mother originally said, and that it was stripped off when it got wet. As I told Smith, I never believed that the child was sexually abused for the gratification of the offender, but the vaginal trauma was some sort of corporal punishment. The dark fibers found in her pubic region could have come from the violent wiping of a wet child. Patsy probably yanked out the diaper package in cleaning up JonBenét. Patsy would not be the first mother to lose control in such a situation. One of the doctors we consulted cited toileting issues as a textbook example of causing a parental rage. So in my hypothesis, there was some sort of explosive encounter in the child's bathroom sometime prior to 1 o'clock in the morning, the time suggested by the digestion rate of the pineapple found in the child's stomach. I believe JonBenét was slammed against a hard surface, such as the edge of a tub, inflicting a mortal head wound. She was unconscious, but her heart was still beating. Patsy would not have known that JonBenét was still alive because the child already appeared to be dead. The massive head trauma would have eventually killed her. It was the critical moment in which she had to either call for help or find an alternative explanation for her daughter's death. It was accidental in the sense that the situation had developed without motive or premeditation. She could have called for help but chose not to. An emergency room doctor probably would have questioned the accident and called the police. Still, little would have happened to Patsy in Boulder, but I believe panic overtook her. John and Burke continued to sleep while Patsy moved the body of JonBenét down to the basement and hid her in the little room. As I pictured the scene, her dilemma was that the police would assume the obvious if a 6-year-old child was found dead in a private home without any satisfactory explanation. Patsy needed a diversion and planned the way she thought a kidnapping should look. She returned upstairs to the kitchen and grabbed her tablet and felt-tip pen, flipping to the middle of the tablet, and started a ransom note, drafting one that ended on page 25. For some reason, she discarded that one and ripped pages 17 through 25 from the tablet. Police never found those pages. On page 26, she began the, quote, Mr. and Mrs. I, close quote, then abandoned that false start. At some point, she drafted the long ransom note. By doing so, she created the government's best piece of evidence. She then faced the major problem of what to do with the body. Leaving the house carried the risk of John or Burke awakening at the sounds and possibly being seen by a passerby or a neighbor. Leaving the body in the distant, almost inaccessible basement room was the best option. As I envisioned it, Patsy returned to the basement, a woman caught up in panic, where she could have seen, perhaps by detecting a faint heartbeat or a sound or a slight movement, that although completely unconscious, JonBenét was not dead. Others might argue that Patsy did not know the child was still alive. In my hypothesis, she took the next step, looking for the closest available items in desperation. Only feet away was her paint tote. She grabbed a paintbrush and broke it to fashion the garrote with some cord. Then she looped the cord around the girl's neck. In my scenario, she choked JonBenét from behind with a grip on her broken paintbrush handle, pulling the ligature. JonBenét, still unconscious, would never have felt it. There are only 4 ways to die: suicide, natural, accidental, or homicide. This accident, in my opinion, had just become a murder. Then the staging continued to make it look like a kidnapping. Patsy tied the girl's wrists in front, not in the back, for otherwise the arms would not have been in the overhead position. But with a 15-inch length of cord between the wrists and the knot tied loosely over the clothing, there was no way such a binding would have restrained a live child. It was a symbolic act to make it appear that the child had been bound. Patsy took considerable time with her daughter, wrapping her carefully in the blanket and leaving her with a favorite pink nightgown. As the FBI had told us, a stranger would not have taken such care. So I told Lou I thought that throughout the coming hours, Patsy worked on her staging, such as placing the ransom note where she would be sure to find it the next morning. She placed the tablet on the countertop right beside the stairs and put the pen in the cup. While going through the drawers and under the countertop, where the tablet had been, she found rolls of tape. She placed a strip from a roll of duct tape across JonBenét's mouth. There was bloody mucus under the tape and a perfect set of the child's lip prints, which did not indicate a tongue impression or resistance. I theorized that Patsy, trying to cover her tracks, took the remaining cord tape and the first ransom note out of the house that night, perhaps dropping them in a nearby storm sewer or among the Christmas debris and wrappings in a neighbor's trash can. She was running out of time. The household was scheduled to wake up early to fly to Michigan, and in her haste, Patsy Ramsey did not change clothes, a vital mistake. With the clock ticking and hearing her husband moving around upstairs, she stepped over the edge. The way I envisioned it, Patsy screamed, and John Ramsey, coming out of the shower, responded, totally unaware of what had occurred. Burke, awakened by the noise shortly before 6 o'clock in the morning, came down to find out what had happened and was sent back to bed as his mother talked to the 911 emergency dispatcher. Patsy Ramsey opened the door to Officer Rick French about 5:55 a.m. on the morning of December 26, 1996, wearing a red turtleneck sweater and black pants, the same thing she had worn to a party the night before. Her hair was done, her makeup was on. In my opinion, she had never been to bed. The diversion worked for 7 hours as the Boulder police thought they were dealing with a kidnapping. John Ramsey, in my hypothetical scenario, probably first grew suspicious while reading the ransom note that morning, which was why he was unusually quiet. He must have seen his wife's writing mannerisms all over it, everything but her signature. But where was his daughter? He said in his police interview that he went down to the basement when Detective Arndt noticed him missing. I suggested that Ramsey found JonBenét at that time and was faced with the dilemma of his life. During the next few hours, his behavior changed markedly as he desperately considered his few options: submit to the authorities or try to control the situation. He had already lost one child, Beth, and now JonBenét was gone too. Now Patsy was possibly in jeopardy. The stress increased steadily during the morning, for Patsy, in my theory, knew that no kidnapper was going to call by 10 o'clock, and after John found the body, he knew that too. So when Detective Linda Arndt told him to search the house, he used the opportunity and made a beeline for the basement. Then, tormented as he might be, he chose to protect his wife. Within a few hours, the first of his many lawyers was in motion, the private investigators a day later. That's the way I see it, I said to Lou Smith. That's how the evidence fits to me. She made mistakes, and that's how we solve crimes, right? I reminded him of his own favorite saying, murders are usually what they seem.
If I could speak to John and Patsy Ramsey, I'd tell them to quit hiding behind their attorneys, quit hiding behind their PR firm, come back to Colorado, work with us to find the killers in this case, no matter where that trail may lead.
Mrs. Ramsey, did you write the ransom note that was discovered by yourself on December 26, 1996 at your home?
No, sir, I did not.
A federal judge says there's no evidence the parents of JonBenét Ramsey killed their 6-year-old daughter. That's why she dismissed a lawsuit against him this week. The U.S. District Court judge also criticized police and the FBI for what she said was a media campaign aimed at making the Ramseys look guilty. The lawsuit was brought by a journalist whom
Pre-pack some gifts in the airplane, check it out, get it ready for an early morning departure. I remember kids being in and out of the house when I was there, neighborhood kids. I remember JonBenét asking me to help her ride her bike around the corner, around the block, her new bike that she'd gotten for Christmas. We were going to go to the Whites that evening for a dinner. We went to the Whites' house where they had family and relatives, friends, I guess. We were perhaps the only friends there for a Christmas dinner.
I did not kill my daughter, JonBenét.
We left. Patsy wanted to drop 2 gifts off at the Walkers and the Steins, which we did on the way home. We pulled in the driveway into the garage. JonBenét was asleep in the back of the car. I carried her upstairs and put her to bed.
Was that the last time you saw JonBenét alive?
Yes, it was. Well, I got up was showering, getting prepared for a trip that we were leaving on early that morning. I heard Patsy scream. I ran downstairs. She told me that JonBenét was missing, that there was a ransom note. She asked me, what should we do? I said, call the police. Sometime during that frantic period, we checked on Burke. He appeared to be asleep to us. And I focused all the energy I could focus on getting my daughter back. A uniformed officer arrives.
I did not kill my daughter. I did not write the ransom note, and I don't know who did either of those things. Someone was in our home the night of December 25th and murdered our daughter while we slept.
The district attorney and his top prosecutors
And thought out effort on the behalf of the police at the direction of the FBI to publicly assassinate our character and discredit us and bring massive pressure on Patsy and I in hopes that one of us would confess or break and turn the other one in. I remember the kids bounding into our room that morning, excited to open their presents. Our normal tradition is that I go downstairs, turn on the Christmas tree lights. I brought a bicycle out of the garage that I had as a surprise for Patsy. The kids came down, we opened presents. JonBenét wanted me to take movies, but my battery was dead. We had breakfast. Christmas breakfast. At some point, I went out to the airport to
two police chiefs, and a large number of cops, although so at odds on some points that they almost came to blows, all agreed on one thing, that probable cause existed to arrest Patsy Ramsey in connection with the death of her daughter.
There was someone who was not a member of our family in our home that night, took JonBenét from her bed and murdered her. I found a ransom note. I found my daughter missing from her bedroom, and several hours later, our daughter was found dead in our home. It's my belief that whoever wrote the ransom note probably had something to do with her murder.
We know for a fact that there was a deliberate